you start to realize that there's more to the universe than meets the eye. You start to realize there's something more going on. And if the astrologer is able to interpret the chart correctly, it's mind-boggling how accurate it is. Another surprise for me was I was working with a leader who was having some real blocks in their leadership, and they'd been in therapy for years. And I saw something in their chart from, because we have an Indian Vedic astrology system, we have different dates of different planetary energies. So I was able to look and say, hey, back in 1993, you had some major violent thing happen in your life. What was that? And they're just like, how do you know that? Wow. Like, I haven't shared that with my therapist in 5 years. Like, how do you know about that trauma? And I can just see it. Like, there it is. Tell me about that. And so now in 10 minutes of an astrology chart, somebody's telling me about their deepest, darkest trauma that they face that they hadn't shared with a therapist in 5 years of therapy. And that release and that understanding of how that fits into their karma, which we could then take into how's it affecting your leadership. And they will then think of, oh, that's why I've been behaving this way with my team.
Welcome to Side Note, the podcast, where we explore the intersection of business and intuition. I'm your host, Samantha Fackler, a Fortune 100 marketing advisor turned leadership coach who has worked with over 100 companies across 13 years and counting. And yes, I also keep crystals on my desk. I love astrology, and I'm a trained Reiki master. So I see the connections that other people miss. Join me for conversations that'll change how you think about business, life, and everything in between. Welcome everyone to today's episode of Side Note, the podcast. We have Vish here, who is an executive coach and Vedic astrologer. And Vish and I actually met a couple months ago at the Berkeley Coaches Conference because we've both been through the Berkeley Executive Coaching Institute. Vish, welcome to the show. I'm so happy you're here.
Thank you, Samantha. I'm so happy to be here for this conversation. We started the conversation at the lunch table, and then I think we decided we need to continue it on a podcast. So here we are.
We did. So what happened is it was lunch break, and we found that this half of the table that we were sitting at were all yogis. So all people who were executive coaches, but also had this other side. And I've always been fascinated about that duality because I think part of our work is working with CEOs, executives, entrepreneurs. But the other half is in this space that feels a bit esoteric compared to, say, typical corporate structures. And what I quickly learned about Vish was that he is an accomplished author. He has 2 books. The first, The Business Casual Yogi, and the second, which he just released on astrology. So Vish, I'm really curious, and I never got to ask you this before, but what inspired the very first book, Business Casual Yogi?
So it kind of goes back to the lunch table where you're sitting around a group of people with dual identities, right? And so in a way, I had this executive career. I was a senior executive in corporate America, but I was also a yogi. And along the way, I always practiced my morning yoga routine. So I had a meditation yoga practice in the morning. I would go through my spiritual sadhana in the morning. And then I would show up at the office and, go forth and conquer and lead divisions and create new business and increase revenue and deal with the office politics and all that. But along the way, my yoga teacher from, the last 25 years, actually, a guy named Vish as well, Yogi Rishi Vish Chatterji, he invited me to volunteer and help him at Bhakti Fest, this huge yoga festival in the desert. So any of you that are on the West Coast, you might have been to Bhakti Fest. It's this crazy 10,000 people all listening to yoga music and doing yoga classes and dancing in the desert. And he was one of the big teachers there. So he asked me to assist him. So I found myself in this huge yoga hall with 140 people in a yoga pose. And he was up on stage directing, and I was out assisting, like helping people get into the right pose and make sure they're doing it correctly and not hurting themselves. And I could feel this energy in the room. And I thought, this is the yoga tribe. And this is part of my tribe, the yoga people. And here I am assisting as a yogi. But little do most people know in this room that I normally wear a business suit and I'm in the corporate world. And that is also my tribe, right? The corporate world is also my tribe. It's where I'd been for over 20 years as, in executive ranks. And so I thought, is there a way for me to bridge these 2 worlds? Can I be a bridge between the yoga tribe and the corporate tribe, the yoga studio and the boardroom? And so I had this idea that maybe I could write a book that explains yoga in a way for the average person, the average working person. So I finished the yoga class, went back to the Airbnb I was staying at, and I drafted up a table of contents. And I went to this yoga teacher friend of mine and I said, hey, Vishwa, here's an idea for a book. I'm the business guy. You're the Himalayan yogi. Can I pick some of your brain and take these teachings from ancient India and then me translate them, apply them to the leadership world? And he was like, yeah, let's do it. And so we went that idea to a publisher, and the publisher thought it was a great idea. And so was born the book, The Business Casual Yogi.
What's so powerful about that too is that I think these listeners have to know like the caliber of business that you're talking about. Like your experience at McKinsey, is it Disney as well?
A.T. Kearney and Daimler Chrysler and Universal Electronics. Yeah.
Huge, 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 massive companies. And that's the last place that you think astrology will have a place in the corporate environment. So okay, you brought this book to market. You wrote it, first of all, which is a feat of itself, but it also came to market. It was informed. You had an advisor there. Could you tell me about the reception?
Yeah. So the reception was fantastic, except that the pandemic hit, right? So I had all these, speaking engagements lined up at different corporations because, the corporate world realized that their executives were being pushed to the brink of exhaustion and disease. And there was already at that time, this was, late 2019, the book launched, but, late teens, you could say, late 2015 onwards. There was already a push in the corporate world to teach executives how to meditate. So they were calling it the mindfulness movement. There's a lot of mindfulness, like how do we be more mindful? How do we find ways to relieve stress? And so there's already this interest in meditation as it applies to finding more peace and finding more balance as a corporate executive. And what I was saying, hey, meditation doesn't really work without a yoga practice as well. Meditation is one of the steps of the whole yoga system. First, move the energies in the body. You do breathing techniques. You sort of get your lifestyle in the right sort of, spiritual aligned or soul aligned lifestyle. And then you can meditate in a deeper way. So what I was teaching was, could I use the yoga philosophy as a leadership development tool? That was the whole concept. And so corporations were very open to that. They're like, yeah, that sounds great. And executives that I was coaching said, yeah, I'd love to learn a little bit of yoga, learn a little bit of breathing techniques, learn some meditation techniques, and find a way to be a better leader and a more intuitive leader. And yoga, if people that are listening understand the yoga concept, it's a system of exercises that lets you connect to your deeper soul. And your deeper soul is also where your intuition resides. So typically people that follow, not the gymnastics yoga, I'm talking about the whole system of yoga, like the yamas, niyamas, asana, pranayama, pratyahara, dhyana, dhan, samadhi, like the full 8 limbs. When you do the whole thing, you activate your intuition, you become a better leader. So you sit in a meeting and you can read between the lines better. You understand people better. You lead people better. So that was the original sort of interest in that. But adjacent to yoga is this mind-body medical system called Ayurveda. And Ayurveda in India is used and even in the US now, is used as a healing system. Let me understand your unique mind-body constitution and let me give you a personalized medicine to heal your disease. That is what Ayurveda is. But I said, hey, this mind-body constitution could be applied to leadership. And in the corporate world, Samantha, I've been through this. There's always a corporate personality test, right? Like what's your MBTI Myers-Briggs type? What's your DISC profile? What's your strengths finder? Like all these personality tests, right?
Clinical, very clinical assessments.
Yeah, clinical assessments, but people love them, right? So I was like, I have an even better clinical assessment. The assessment used for Ayurveda, mind-body medicine. And that clinical assessment is used to figure out your disease pathways and how to prevent disease through lifestyle changes based on your unique mind-body constitution. It's a medical clinical assessment. But I said, let me leverage that for leadership. And so in my first book, The Business Casual Yogi, not only is there a bunch of stuff on yoga, but there's a quiz in the book. And people love quizzes, right? There's a quiz in the book that determines your mind-body constitution and how that applies to you as a leader and how to balance your type of work that you do with your right diet and lifestyle to make you a better leader. So it's almost like I brought yoga and Ayurveda together, and that was sort of started to be accepted because it's kind of medically and it's got this assessment thing. And so people are receiving to it. No way could I shove astrology into that at that point. Right. Astrology is like way out there, but the progression from yoga to Ayurveda, people are okay with. Right? It's
Absolutely.
medicine.
I mean, going back to those beautiful words you shared before, this deeper connection to the soul is where our intuition lives. And I know you talked about the 8 limbs, right? For those that don't know Sanskrit, what are those 8 steps in the yoga portion? And then I definitely want to get into the Ayurveda as well.
Ayur Yeah, Ayurveda. Perfect. Ayurveda. Yeah. So the limbs, there are 8 limbs, and this is what comprises yoga. And I wrote about it at length in the book. But the idea is that you start with the yama and niyama, which are personal guidelines and societal guidelines. These are things that, managing your sexual energies, managing, being honest, not stealing, not grasping for things, not being overly attached. Very simple sort of like lifestyle guidance that lives a pretty happy life. And when you have yamas and niyamas and you live with some amount of personal and societal discipline, then you can begin doing what's called asana, which are the postures, the actual physical movement. And when you do the physical postures on the mat, which is what most Americans only focus on that one limb. So you kind of do 1/8 of the practice, right? But you do the physical postures and they open up the energetic channels, which is then when you move to the 4th limb, which is called pranayama, where it's breathing, but it's not breathing. It's bringing an energy to those energetic channels that you opened up through the physical practices. So yoga practice has the movement, and then the breath then infuses the body with that energy. Those are the first 4 limbs. The last 4 steps are all meditation steps. The first one is called pratyahara, withdrawal from your senses. So you close your eyes, you don't listen to anyone or anything, you don't speak, you don't touch anything, you don't smell anything. You're withdrawing from the senses. That then allows you to do what is called dharana, which is a focus on some object of your meditation. So somebody has a mantra, somebody has an image, somebody has a focus on their breath, doesn't matter. All meditation has some focus. That's dharana. When you focus on that one thing and you've withdrawn from all senses, then you achieve the state of meditation, which is called dhyan, the meditative state. And when you enter the meditative state, there's a moment where you leave reality. In a way, you leave. You forget where you are, you lose sense of time and space, and that's the 8th step called samadhi. So in order for that complete sort of meditative experience to happen, you need all these 7 steps to get to that 8th step. That's the concept, right? Mm-hmm. And of course, in the Western world, it's like, well, I like this piece, so I'm going to become a breathwork instructor, or I like this piece, so I'm going to just teach physical gymnastics on a mat, or somebody else is just teaching meditation and not the others. But yoga is a system. It's all these 8 things together, right? Mm-hmm. That makes yoga means union. And so for the union of mind, body, and soul to happen, you actually need all these 8 things to happen together.
It makes so much sense how it's a system too, because they all support one another. Like I know when I first realized that there was even a connection or path at all was when I heard that yoga prepares the body for meditation so that you can sit comfortably and you can tune in and you're, energetically aligned for that practice. And then fast forward time, I found myself at a Vipassana retreat. And I remember they say not to do yoga or any exercise, but in the morning, I kind of cheated and I did yoga in the morning because I needed to for my body. And I found that the days where I did do a little bit of light yoga in my space before the day of meditation, everything kind of came together. And I did have moments of samadhi and really feeling that, I don't know, it's not necessarily ecstasy, but it's like you're kind of, you're removed from reality a bit and you're suspended into this timeless space.
Yeah, exactly right. And that's a great sort of personal experience of what these 8 limbs do, right? And so yoga was developed probably 8,000 years ago as a system. And then along the way, all these other traditions came about and borrowed bits and pieces of it. And so then it's like they sort of picked one piece and said, okay, this is it. But then it's like, wait, you missed the whole thing. It's like that story of the elephant and somebody grabs the trunk and says, oh, this is the whole elephant. Somebody grabs the tail and says, this is the whole elephant. Don't realize there's this big elephant. There's this whole system. There's this whole being. And so what I've been trying to do with my work is remind people of what was the original system, what was the original teaching, and can we go back to that? Because it was very sophisticated and seems to have all the solutions to our modern challenges.
Absolutely. It's such a beautiful system. And when I got yoga certified, that's when when I realized the step by step and what's actually involved in each. And the yamas and the niyamas are beautiful, like beautiful guidelines. And I really urge the listeners to go and just check them out. Just read them and see if they resonate for you. But I also want to get into the Ayurveda. I really struggle with this word.
Yeah. So the thing is, the whole system comes from the Vedas. Veda. So Veda is the body of knowledge. So Veda is a word that everyone knows. Veda means the system of knowledge. Ayus means life. And from Ayus comes the word Ayur. So Ayurveda means the knowledge of life. Ayurveda. Veda is the knowledge system. Ayur is life, Ayurveda.
Beautiful. And I've read about this, clearly haven't spoken about it because I can't pronounce it, but it's a really powerful system for your body for nutrition because you can get guidelines for your specific body type, right? And there's 3 different types. Do you want to just touch on those briefly?
Oh, sure. So, as people go deeper into yoga, they start to learn about these allied sciences, these other systems that are parallel to yoga. And so I find, like, if you imagine a stool with 3 legs, one leg of the stool is yoga. And as you figure out yoga, you discover the next leg, which is Ayurveda. And eventually, as you get into Ayurveda, you'll discover the 3rd leg of the stool, which is the astrology system, which we'll get to.
Mm-hmm.
So Ayurveda basically understands that no 2 human beings are the same. We're all unique. That's the first thing. So just like in Western medicine, you go to a doctor, if you have the same disease as the next person in the waiting room, you're both probably going to get the same medication. But with an Ayurvedic doctor, they're going to say, well, it may be the same disease, but these 2 people are unique and different. And so they need a different medicine based on their particular constitution. And so what Ayurveda starts to do is it starts to categorize and understand you as a human being based on your life experiences, based on your birth circumstances, based on your natural genetics. You are some combination of 3 main groupings. We call them doshas. One is a fiery disposition, one is an airy disposition, and one is an earthy disposition. It's more complex. It's called Vata, Pitta, Kapha. But in simple terms, Vata is an airy person, Pitta is a fiery person, and Kapha is an earthy person. So the way you react to things is different. Like, so for instance, let's get away from disease for a second. In a corporation, some disaster happens. The project goes off the rails and everybody's upset. The Vata person, because they're airy, starts to get worried that it was their fault. Airy to worry, and they start saying, you know what, did I do something wrong? Maybe I didn't submit the thing right. Maybe I didn't lead the team right. Maybe I said the wrong thing. They start to get very anxious and worried, right? The Pitta fiery person, same problem, same situation, but they're angry. They're screaming. Who did this? Some head's going to roll. I'm going to fire a bunch of people. It was not my fault. It was everybody else's fault, right? That's a fiery kind of constitution. The Kapha, the earthy, says, is there a problem? Is it that bad a problem? I don't know if there's really a problem. And they're sort of like almost not feeling the problem. They're almost like, you know what? It'll be okay. They're sort of calm and steady through it, right? So there's sort of these 3 different reactions that we all know people that react in different ways, right? Now, when these particular Vata, Pitta, Kapha, these 3 doshas get out of balance, they start to spill over into disease. So Vata people tend to have anxiety, insomnia, constipation. They feel cold all the time. Pitta people, they feel hot all the time. They're getting angry all the time. They're getting judgmental and critical. They're turning red in their face. Meanwhile, Kapha people start to get a bit stagnant. They start to get excess weight. They start to get heavy. They start to feel a bit like depressed and not able to move and do things, right? When they get out of balance. And all I did was say, hey, let's take these same things and apply them to leadership and say, if you have a job that requires a lot of sitting and not moving, you're going to have excess kapha. You're going to have excess earth element. If you have a job that requires you to yell and scream a lot or push people and do a lot of tasks, you're going to have a lot of fire element. It's going to spill over at some point. If you have a creative job and you do a lot of thinking and kind of creativity, which is airiness, then you're going to start to have vata symptoms. And so we can manage those based, you have to do your work, but what can you do in your lifestyle to balance that? So if you have a lot of creative work, you need a lot of grounding after work. If you have a lot of fiery, aggressive work, you need a lot of cooling after work. If you have a lot of sitting, earthy work, then you need a lot of stimulation outside of work. That was the concept.
Wow. And correct me if I'm wrong, can you have multiple, like you can have a majority of one and then maybe a little bit of another one?
Yeah, you can have very heavy in one or the other. You can have a mix of 2. You can have a mix of 3 as well. But you can also shift based on your lifestyle. So you may have been born one way, but then because of all your lifestyle choices or the climate you live in or the type of environment you're in, you might shift to another one.
Interesting. I felt a shift for me when I started my own company and I stopped working for someone else and started working for myself. And now that I'm hearing you say this, I'm thinking probably because I have more air in my life than before, because I'm constantly creating. And that energy is completely ramped up versus before when I worked for someone else.
Yeah, entrepreneurs definitely have a lot of vata. They have a lot of excess air element because they're using their mind a lot. They're creating new things and no 2 days are alike, right? Like what you did last month versus what you're going to do next month changes. And that constant change is a wind airy energy. And so they can get Vata imbalance. A lot of entrepreneurs suffer with sleeplessness, insomnia. They suffer with digestive issues because the digestion is the first thing to go with Vata. And so entrepreneurs for sure need a lot of grounding. And so usually I recommend when you have a lot of air element or you have a very creative role, at least dunk yourself in oil once in a while, right? Oil is the grounding thing. And so like, how do you dunk yourself in oil these days? Well, you get an oil massage, right? An oil massage on a regular basis is one of those calming Vata things. I even teach people how to do a self-massage with oil as a morning practice. 5-minute, massage your body with oil and then go take a shower. And that grounding film of oil in your body helps ground that energy throughout the day, right?
I need to do that.
Yes. Oh, it's lovely, right? And then, of course, you have to eat grounding foods. Now, how many, I live in LA where you see a lot of Vata people. And you can see Vata people because you can see their bones. If you hold a hand up of Vata, you can see their bones very clear. That's a Vata kind of energy, exactly.
Oh, wow.
So automatically from the way your face structure and hand structure, you can see a lot of Vata energy predominant. And then when you have an entrepreneurial type of work, it sort of doubles up. And what I see Vata people doing is they eat a lot of raw foods and salads, right? A lot of raw foods. And those are cold foods that aggravate the air element. It's raw, it's airy because it's not cooked and the cell structure is further apart. So this aggravates Vata. So Vata people need the opposite. They need to eat hot, cooked, grounding foods, heavy foods like potatoes and root vegetables to ground them, right? But, people tend to pick the wrong diet for their constitution and their lifestyle. So in the first book, I talked a lot about that. Like, here, take the quiz. Based on the quiz, here's your constitution type. And based on that, let's think about different jobs and what constitution it aggravates. And then what's the right diet? What's the right way to eat? What's the right lifestyle? What are the right practices to sort of ground that energy?
Wow. Okay. I think everyone listening to this is going to go take the assessment and figure out their type.
Yeah, you're going to have to stop your morning smoothie.
Yeah.
Cold morning smoothie for creative people is very difficult.
No, I can't even do that anymore. I have been drawn to warmer foods, like so much more pasta and carbs and proteins. So that makes a lot of sense.
Good.
Very interesting.
Warm soups, very good for you too.
Yeah. Oh, I'm a soup girl through and through. I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about the third leg of the stool, astrology. And this is your latest book too. I think one of the biggest takeaways from our initial conversation was the difference between Vedic astrology and Western astrology. And for the complete beginners listening, what's the difference between the two?
Well, so I have to give a little bit of context. So first of all, I was trained as an engineer. So my background is mechanical engineering. And then of course I was a corporate executive. I was in the corporate world for 20 years. And I'm all about data and about the truth and show me the numbers. And we're not going to invest in that business until we see the real, the data behind it, the logic behind it. So if you had said to me, hey, Vish, what do you think of astrology? Let's say 10 years ago, I'd have been like, that's nonsense. Like, I just don't believe in that. I don't see the data. And the reason yoga and Ayurveda fit with me, because there seemed to be a science and a logic behind it. And astrology to me just seemed like this made up sort of, you pick up a newspaper or a magazine or some website and it's like, oh, you're born in June, so you must be a gem, whatever. And then you're this and that. And it tells you, and I'm like, that's just nonsense, right? So I was doing my coaching practice and I was coaching a lot of executives and they would come to me. And sure enough, when you started coaching with me, you would get a questionnaire. That was the first thing. Intake form would have a questionnaire and the questionnaire was an Ayurvedic questionnaire. And I would get the questionnaire and based on what you wrote, I would start to think about how do you improve your lifestyle to support your leadership journey? But in the corporate world, and this is worldwide, if you're a fiery type, you get promoted. It's just how it goes. If you're fiery type, you get the bigger job. Type A personalities are rewarded. So it's almost like people had self-selected into type A personality because they knew that was what was required to get ahead. And they were sort of shying away or hiding from the truth of who they really were. So every time I would give a quiz, the results I was getting back was fiery types. Even though in front of me, I'm seeing all the signs that they're not a fiery type. There's an airy type, there's an earthy type, but it's like almost like it was getting cheated out of the quiz. So I went to the Ayurvedic doctor I was training with, and his name is Dr. Suhas. And I said, Dr. Suhas, my clients are cheating on the quiz. What do I do? This assessment's not working. It's too easy to cheat. And, if you take the Myers-Briggs or whatever, they have all these built-in things to prevent cheating. They have ways to get to truth. But this is Ayurveda. It wasn't developed in that way. So there's no anti-cheating mechanism built in. So I said, they're cheating on the quiz. What do I do? And he said, Vish, very simple. Look at their astrology chart. You'll get the truth.
Interesting.
Astrology chart? I don't believe in that stuff. He's like, no, look at the Indian astrology, the Vedic astrology, the third leg of the stool, the thing that's integrated with yoga and Ayurveda. There's a scientific, logical way that astrology works. And if you use the Indian system, you're going to get the ground truth on this person. So I was like, okay, let me try it out. I'm willing to experiment. So I would, have a client like you, Samantha. I'd say, hey, Samantha, I got a weird question for you, but can you tell me when you were born? What was your birth date? What was your birth time? Where on earth were you born? And with the exact information of your birth, the minute you were born, the time, location, I would pull a chart for that moment. And for that moment, when I pulled the chart, I would see very clearly, oh, this is a Vata personality. And every time I pick it up, the clients were like, yeah, you figured me out. How did you figure me out? How do you know this about me? I've been trying to hide that for years. Even my therapist doesn't know that detail about me.
Wow.
So now I was trying to get this feedback. I'm like, wow, there's something here. So then I started to figure out what is different about Vedic astrology. Well, first thing, pop culture Western astrology is based on your sun sign, meaning what month were you born and what sign is connected to that. And what they're doing is they're saying the sun was in this part of the sky where Capricorn was or Sagittarius was. But it turns out the math that the Western astrologer uses is not aligned to the actual sky. So now I'm going to upset a lot of Western astrologers because they're going to say, our astrology system works just fine. I'm so sure it works fine, but it's not accurate to the sky. So if you get out of the chart and you actually look up in the sky, it doesn't line up. The Western astrology chart lines up to the sky from 2,000 years ago. So my question is, why is the sky from 2,000 years ago relevant for today? Doesn't make sense to me. Just me as an engineer. So Vedic astrology says, what's the sky today, now? Oh, you're back.
We're back. Okay. I don't know what just happened.
Controversy, the energy of the controversy blew up the systems, right? So you can feel the souls of the Western astrologers getting very upset with this Vedic astrologer challenging the math. Right?
For our listeners, technology just fritzed out on us when Vish was explaining basically the difference that the sky was very different 2,000 years ago. So the two astrological systems are basically based on different skies, right?
Yeah, different calculations of the sky. And so Vedic astrology says, let's correct the actual math. So at the moment of your birth, at the exact time you were born, if I were to stand at the hospital and look east, what star constellation would I actually see? Because, for instance, in the Western system, you call it a sign. Mm-hmm. In Vedic astrology, we call it a rashi, which means a heap of energy. So I didn't even know exactly what heap of energy, what stars of energy were showering your birth. And so it becomes very exact, the exact moment. We use a rising sign, but it's not really a sign, it's a constellation. The rising constellation, at the moment you were born, what was on the east, and what that does to influence your personality. That becomes the key thing. Then we look at the moon and where the moon was located. So we kind of care a lot about the moon location because that's our emotions. Then at a very tertiary level, do we look at the sun? And even then the sun using the right math. So I would say the biggest difference is the Vedic astrology aligns to the sky, the real sky, the reality of the sky. And it is almost like an X-ray vision deep into your soul versus Western astrology is sort of a way to understand your psychology and kind of your current state. It's psychology. So yeah, for superficial psychology, what are you? What's your ego? Western astrology does a pretty good job. And I think Western astrologers also have a lot of intuitive powers. So even using a chart that isn't aligned to the sky, they're able to get a lot of insight around a person. And if they're gifted, they'll be able to, say things about the person. But the Vedic astrology says, hey, let's get the right math. And based on that, what is the truth of this soul? So when people want to know, what is my soul career? What is my soul path? How do I find a soul mate? These alignment things are better determined through a Vedic astrology chart. It's, what is my ego? How do I see myself? How does the world see me? What is sort of my, superficial level psychology? What are my psychological traits? The Western astrology does a good job at explaining those.
Yeah, it's so fascinating, the two. I was talking to a friend recently who's Indian who said, for Indian marriages, they're looking at Vedic astrology for that match, right? Where Western, she was saying that her parents use that for kind of like day to day or kind of, as you were saying, like more of that current piece. What was interesting to me is that I took your assessment on your website. So head to Vish's website in the show notes for the quiz. And I did mine and I did my partner's. And my Vedic is very different than my Western. So my Western says I'm a Capricorn sun, Cancer rising. My Vedic is Sagittarius is my main Rashi. Is it like a sun Rashi? Is that what I would say?
The sun, yeah, the sun sign. But what was your rising sign in Vedic?
Gemini.
Exactly.
Very
Yeah.
different. Yeah.
So that's the difference. So now you can say, I thought I was a Cancer, and now it's saying I'm Gemini. What happened? The thing is, Cancer's constellation is somewhere in your chart. Every one of us have all 12 signs somewhere in the sky when we were born. At the moment you were born, all 12 signs are there. So in a way, you are all 12 signs. So this whole idea of like, well, I'm a this and not a that, and I don't like that sign. I don't like those Cancer people. I'm a Gemini or blah, blah. Like that doesn't make sense because all the signs are somewhere in your chart, but they just show up in different areas of your life. So if you're a Gemini rising, that is a big part of your personality. Gemini is about information, knowledge. It's ruled by, so I want to ask you, if you're a Gemini rising, what is the planet that rules that sign?
I don't know. Is it Mercury?
Yeah, Mercury. Very good. So that's an important concept, that the sign, the zodiac constellation, is an expression of a planet. Okay. So every sign has a planet behind it. So Gemini's planet behind it is actually Mercury, and Mercury is a planet of technology and information. So information, technology, trivia, facts, podcasts, these all fall into Mercury. Expression, speaking, communicating, writing, these are all the things Gemini would like to do. So that fits, right? Mm-hmm. But then you're like, well, what about Cancer? Well, Cancer is all about emotions and the heart and exchange of feelings. But Cancer then shows up as the next sign over. So if you're a Gemini, your second house would be Cancer, and that comes down to food. So you may get a lot of nourishment and enjoyment through food. You might be a bit of a foodie. You may say, you know what? I really feel comforted when I eat delicious food. Cancer is also in the second house connected to income. And so you'll have an emotional connection to how you earn your money. You want to earn your money in a way that makes sense to your heart. So the signs all show up somewhere else, right?
I feel like you just peered into my soul. That was so accurate. Wow. Wow, wow, wow. And the funny thing too is that, well, mine, that makes a lot of sense for mine. And then my husband's was pretty similar. He's a Sagittarius sun, but also Sagittarius sun in Vedic. He had Virgo in both charts. I think he had one other sign that changed. I'm forgetting which, but yeah, listeners, go look up your signs. It's so interesting. Another thing I'm thinking of that's probably a little random, but human design. My human design says that my area of comfort is the kitchen, and that's related to this.
Well, I think as I understand human design, and I don't know a lot about it, but it is based on astrology.
Mm-hmm. It is.
And if you do your human design and it says that you're connected to the kitchen, that is a Cancer thing. They're using the Western calculation of your Cancer rising sign, right?
Okay.
So probably, right, is what's going on there. Now, the thing is, Cancer shows up somewhere, so it works. I mean, that's why even if I pick a random Western astrology thing and I pick a random sign, I'm going to find something that applies to me, right? So for instance, as a Gemini rising, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12, your house of career would be Pisces. Okay. So that means your career would be, in a way, a bit all over the place. Pisces is a sign with no boundaries. So you'd be like, I want this and I want that. And I want to try this and I want to try that. And so is that the case? Like in your career, it's been like, what's the path, right?
I have that tendency. Yeah. I would get really restless basically at the year mark of any job. And then I'd be like, okay, I want to try something new. I want to get into a different company or industry or whatever. Yeah.
And until you find a career that aligns with spirituality, because Pisces is the most spiritual sign, you won't settle, right? So that's the Pisces energy. So now if you were to read in a horoscope and you just happen to fall on Pisces and it tells you about Pisces, you'd be like, oh yeah, that's me. But it's you in the career lens. Mm-hmm. But because you spend a lot of time in your career, it's a lot of who you are. You're like, yeah, I can relate to that. So I feel like any astrology explanation you pick up, you're going to find something of value, right?
Right.
But because I'm an engineer, I'm like, I want to look at the real math, like what's really in the sky, what is really where things are. And then when you start putting planets into different signs, then you start to see how things get modified, right? So that becomes a more interesting thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And you use astrology with your clients who are, CEOs, executives at these massive, massive companies. So could you describe kind of the surprising things that you found when you do bring astrology into those conversations?
So it becomes the ultimate personality test, right? At the end of the day, all this personality test interest in the corporate world is people trying to understand themselves better. And now I have the ultimate personality test. Like, forget about giving a quiz or a questionnaire. I got your birth chart. I got like the moment that you were born, what's going on. And I can look at the birth chart. I can look at planetary periods that you're in. I can look at transits over that birth chart and start to see when things will happen. What's the right timing for things? When's the time to make an investment? When's the time to sell off a division? When's the time to hire? When's the time to fire? Why certain people activate things in your chart based on their name and how that irritates you in certain ways. You have this difficult business co-CEO that you don't get along with. Put the two charts together and see where the areas are, like a marriage compatibility, but between two leaders, right? So it just gives us deep insight. And I guess what was surprising to me was I'm a little bit was reserved about Vedic astrology. I was like, look, people are going to think I'm crazy. Let me just stick with Ayurveda. And, if somebody's ready and says, hey, Vish, I'm open to this, then I'll do it. But I had this senior director of sales at a big medical devices company, large company. And he engaged with me for coaching. And so I was helping with leadership, helping him with, managing the team and increasing sales. And at the seventh session, so we'd had 6 coaching sessions, all pure executive coaching. Session number 7, he's like, Vish, when are you going to do that planet thing with me? I was like, planet thing? Tell me more. What do you mean by that planet thing? He's like, I don't know. The guy who referred me, he said you did this thing and you figured out when he was born and you told him about the planets. And I just want to know that. When is it going to happen? I've been waiting. I thought, oh, you're ready for that? Okay. And so then I pulled up his chart and it took our engagement to a whole nother level, right? So I think surprising for me is how open people are when they're really struggling with something, how open they are and willing they are to try something different. And I'm usually a little bit like, you're ready for that? You're okay with that? And you'll be surprised, when you go through leadership and you get into very difficult situations and you're really challenged to your core, you start to realize that there's more to the universe than meets the eye. You start to realize there's something more going on. And if the chart, if the astrologer is able to interpret the chart correctly, it's mind-boggling how accurate it is. Another surprise for me was I was working with a leader who was having some real blocks in their leadership, and they'd been in therapy for years. And I saw something in their chart from, because we have an Indian Vedic astrology system, we have different dates of different planetary energies. So I was able to look and say, hey, back in 1993, you had some major violent thing happen in your life. What was that? And they're just like, how do you know that? Wow. I haven't shared that with my therapist in 5 years. How do you know about that trauma? And I can just see it. There it is. Tell me about that. And so now in 10 minutes of an astrology chart, somebody's telling me about their deepest, darkest trauma that they faced that they hadn't shared with a therapist in 5 years of therapy, right? And that release and that understanding of how that fits into their karma, which we could then take into how's it affecting your leadership. And they will then think of, oh, that's why I've been behaving this way with my team. And this is something I need to work on. And then we work on clearing that up. It's transformational, right? So it's beyond a personality test at that point.
Right. It's so much more than just, hey, this is your personality and this is what to expect today in your horoscope. It's who you are, a map of your life in a way, which is so fascinating.
And it gives you a validation of why things happen the way they happen.
Mm-hmm.
Why did this happen to me? I feel like such a victim, but now I realize this was part of my evolution. This is part of who I am. This is what's making me strong. So you take what you thought was your handicap and turn it into your strength, right?
Yeah, absolutely. There's so much here. I think something coming to mind too is how have you used astrology in your own practice? Because you are an entrepreneur, you're an author, you're a coach, you just went to India, and you're always doing amazing things. So what are practices that you personally use with Vedic astrology in, I guess, mapping out your life in a way?
So for me, there's the interpretive side of Vedic astrology to kind of say, okay, here's the energies, here's what's happening, here's how I explain why things are happening. I can use astrology to predict things. I can say, okay, in the future, here are the energies, here's when you'll meet a relationship, or here's when a promotion is likely, those kind of things. But for myself, I don't sit there looking at my chart, analyzing what's going to happen and when and what, there's the interpretive and predictive side, but there's also the spiritual conscious living side, right? In ancient times, yoga was a path to live a more conscious, eyes wide open life. So was Vedic astrology. Vedic astrology in Sanskrit is called Jyotish. Jyotish. Jyotir means light. Isha means God. So at the end of the Jyotish is the light of God. We are peeking into consciousness. And so as a Jyotishi, one who practices Vedic astrology, it in and of itself is a spiritual path. It is a spiritual practice in and of itself. And it starts to help you see the world through the lens of the divine creator. And so what starts to happen is rather than looking at the chart, I start to pay attention to the world around me, right? Because what am I doing when I look at a chart? I'm like, oh, Mars is here, therefore it must mean this. But Mars is thousands of miles away. What happens when I'm doing something and trying to make a decision and a fire truck runs by behind my window? That's Mars showing up behind my window, not out in space.
Yes.
It's red. Mars is red. Mars rules emergencies and accidents. Fire truck is usually deployed because fire and accidents. So that's an omen that's happening right behind me, not out in space somewhere. So you start to see the world in a totally different way. The words people use, the things people say, the actions that happen around you, start to interpret what the universe is trying to communicate with you. And what's interesting about Vedic astrology, it's almost like you understand how the matrix works and you get to reach behind it and adjust a knob and then come back to the matrix. You have that ability to reach behind, adjust a knob, and change something. And that happens a lot through rituals. I'm a big practitioner of rituals. I do fire ceremonies. I do mantras. I do specific yoga practices. I do specific worship, certain techniques of worship that are from ancient times. And these rituals start to change energies. And that's what I found has become kind of my deeper journey, is doing rituals and then prescribing rituals to people. So somebody comes to me and says, look, I'm having trouble. I'm having just today, I'm having trouble with my thesis advisor. I'm having trouble getting through my PhD program. This thing is going wrong. And I see in the chart, oh, here's this energy. Here's what's out of balance. Go do this ritual. Do it every day, every morning, 5-10 minutes of your time. And then over months, that energy will change and it'll work out. Right.
Wow.
So it starts to become like, how do you manage your karma? How do you manage your life? Both from a physical point of view, a mental point of view, but also from a spiritual point of view. Mm-hmm. Like, what are the best practices? We're all limited in time, so you don't want to do like 2 hours of different things. How do we target? Like, here's the specific yoga poses, here's a specific chants, and here's a specific deities that you can do to change this thing in your life.
Yeah, definitely. And now I want to go down a whole other rabbit hole that we probably don't have time for on rituals and altars. So maybe that's the future episode.
Rituals and altars, yes.
One anecdote I do want to share is last night, my husband David and I, we were kind of learning about the chant Om and the parts of that and how they really express these different parts of the body. So just below the navel, the chest, and the throat, and how they're connected to creator, kind of maintenance and destruction, right? And I believe it's right. Brahma, Vishnu, and there we go, the third.
Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva.
Which was fascinating. And we started to chant Om together over and over and over, which felt like an hour. But the energy, both of us individually and the room, completely shifted. And that was my first practice with a chant like that. And yeah, I feel like I'm so much more open to different rituals, larger rituals, ceremonies like you mentioned, but also these smaller things that can be done on a daily basis.
And what I learned in the Vedic system, and when I say Vedic system, I mean all these ancient Indian healing traditions, right? Whether it's yoga, Ayurveda, Jyotish, there's a whole system of plant medicine, there's a whole system of music, there's a whole music tradition, there's a whole breathing system, so many, right? There's a whole system on dance, there's a system on warfare, there's a system on law and society and justice, so many things. There's a huge system. But all of it rests on the most simple practice. At the end of the day, there's always one simple practice that begins it all. And so whole mantra tradition. There's an entire school of mantras, complex mantras, complicated verses and structure and grammar and all that. But the root of it is Om. And if you get Om right and you just focus on that, the other knowledge comes along the way.
Interesting.
Same like yoga. There's so many poses. There's so many different ways. But if you just get one of them, the basic sitting pose, sit. If you can sit, all the other poses come along. So the idea is that if you do the simplest practice and you make it a regular thing, the simplest thing, it opens up the energetic channels for the other more advanced knowledge to come to you. Even in Vedic astrology, just knowing what the 9 planets are and forming a relationship with their energies opens up the whole dimension of how they then show up through signs, which then how they show up through houses, and the whole astrology world opens up. So what I did with my book, Astrology Decoded, is called Astrology Decoded, The Secret Science of India's Sages. I said, forget about all the complicated stuff. It's getting too heady for people. Let's get down to the basics. Here are these 9 planets. 7 of them we can see. Those 7 planets correlate to the 7 days of the week, which the Indian sages came up with, actually. And if you understand these 7 energies and relate to them on each of the 7 days of the week, the whole astrology system will open up in you. You just have to know them, right? And so like today is Friday. In India, we call it Shukravar. Shukravar means Venus Day, Friday. And then, of course, in Western tradition, there was a goddess Freya. And Freya was a Norse goddess who was connected to Venus. Today's Venus. And Venus's color is pink. That's why I'm wearing pink, right?
Amazing.
It's connected to women. And your audience is primarily women, right? Mm. You can see how the energy shows up in different ways. And so this was understood in these ancient people that each day of the week has certain energy. So if you want to do something that's harmony and fun and happy and loving, do it on a Friday. If you want to get married, do it on a Friday. Most people in America get married on Saturday, Saturn's day. Saturn is the planet of obstacle and restriction. How's our divorce rate in this country?
Not great.
I got married on Saturday, but we're okay. We had to do lots of rituals to overcome that Saturday wedding day. But in India, usually Friday is a better day because the Venus planet of love.
Right.
The stone for Venus is the diamond. Planet of love. What is the stone we give somebody when we want to get married? It's the diamond.
Diamond, wow.
All these things become cultural, but they become divorced from the original intelligence of the stars and the planets that predated all of it.
Right. I need to dig back into it because at some point I did come across this, and I'm forgetting Thursday, but Thursday is always when I do like finances for my business. But I've been doing it for so long that I forget what it's connected to. So could you remind me what's Thursday?
Thursday is connected to Thor. I guess Thor somehow had a connection to Jupiter. I think in Spanish is Jueves, which is more similar. In French is Jeudi, which is Jupiter's day. And in India, we call it Guruvar. Guru means guru, which you heard the word guru means teacher, but that actually means Jupiter. Jupiter was the ultimate teacher. So Thursday is connected to Jupiter. Jupiter is the planet of wisdom, expansion, increasing, and wealth expansion, happiness, all of that. So if you're doing your finances on a Thursday, it means you have a mindset to grow your finances. Jupiter is a planet of abundance. So if you do finances on Thursdays, it means you want abundance in your finances.
Yes, I do want abundance in my finances.
So that's why. If you want to be good at the accounting of it, then Wednesday's a better day.
Great distinction. Okay, thank you for that. I wish we could dive into so much more of this and on a deeper level. Vish, thank you so much for being here. Where can our listeners find more about you, get astrology decoded, and dig in?
Oh, thank you. Samantha, it was just a pleasure. What a conversation. And time just disappeared. I don't know if we were in samadhi state the whole time, but I'm like, I thought we just got started, but now here we are, like at the end of the show. So it was fantastic. I had fun. I hope the listeners enjoyed. You can find me at vishchatterji.com, VISHCHATTERJI.com. And from there's a link to purchase the book. The book is sold wherever books are sold worldwide. So, in the US, Amazon's pretty convenient, but Barnes & Noble, Target, wherever you want, Astrology Decoded. And then if you want to work with me, you got to go through a few steps to find me. But if you start at vishchatterji.com, you'll eventually get there. I'm the opposite marketer, Samantha. I make it hard to find me.
You've created a maze.
Yeah, it's a maze. Only those who are qualified can find me, which just requires a couple of clicks, so it's not that bad.
Oh, I think some people are going to find you after this episode. Vish, this was truly incredible. Probably one of my favorite episodes I've ever recorded. Thank you for sharing so much of your wisdom. And with that, we'll do another podcast episode in the future.
Sounds great, Samantha. That was so much fun. Thank you so much for having me. And I hope everybody enjoyed and got some little bit of lightness in their life from our conversation today.
Absolutely. And thank you, listeners. If you enjoyed this show, please leave a rating and review. And my name's Samantha Fackler. We'll catch you next time.
Thank you.